I was sent this beach agate and I was asked if I could facet this and make a pendant. Now, what I'm going to be doing with this is we're going to be doing a round cut, and I got a nice design that I'm going to be using for this. In terms of inclusions, it's pretty clean, 23 by 33 millimeters long, pretty large piece. So typically you would take a piece like this and use a trim saw. I actually don't even have one right now. So I'm just using my 80 grit, putting a mask on to help with any dust that might be created from this, and I'm going to really shave down a bulk of the material. Now, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that I take out the most amount of inclusions and little imperfections inside. It's like little blobs of brown, and basically I'm just trying to work those out and salvage the cleanest part. So after doing so, we're at 17.7 by basically 17 millimeters. That's pretty good. I'm ready to dop this up. Now I have a piece of wax on the one dop holding it in place just so I can get things centered, and I'm going to be using my UV glue for this. Now typically with a piece this big, I'll do a couple rounds of UV glue, so I'll do a small amount, UV cure it, and keep adding more layers just to make sure that the entirety of the glue right to the core is hardened. So we're back on the 80 grit lap, and I'm going to be cutting off the perimeter to form the girdle. Now I free-formed this into a cube, and I'm basically just evening the cube out to make sure that one side is similar to the other in depth. And then I'm going to actually round this out. So you can see a shot on the bottom there. We're just starting off here. That's the starting shape, and I've started to round off one of the corners. I like to put the sponge in the splash pan. It actually helps with catching the water that would shoot off the lap otherwise. So that's a little tip if you guys are using the Ultratech. So this has been cut, and we have the main shape of the stone formed in. It's just a round. And now I'm going to quickly cut in the culet, which is the point that's formed on the pavilion here. And that's just going to allow me to have the general shape of the stone ready to go. And then I'll be able to transfer off of the 80 grit, which is an extremely aggressive lap, and typically people don't cut with them. This 80 grit's actually a little more worn down though, so it might be performing more like a 150 or 200. So there we can see the culet is formed in, and I'm ready now to transfer over to my 320 grit. Now this is going to be the main workhorse lap for this project. This is going to get everything shaped in properly, and this is going to get me ready for my 1200 sintered, which I always use before my pre-polish. And the reason I use that 1200 sintered, it's extremely balanced and calibrated comparative to these electroplated or topper laps, and that's why it's my favorite go-to before I use my pre-polish or my polish lap. So there we can start to see the design, and we are ready to transfer over to that 1200 sintered. Now the lap underneath you see is a 6-inch lap that's a master lap, and I just use that to actually raise the height of the 1200 grit sintered because it's only a 1/4 inch thick, where typically a lap might be closer to a 1/2 inch. And that just helps for when you're cutting your girdle. I have to bend the splash pan out of the way, and if the lap's too low, it's just hard to touch the stone against the lap. So there we have the 1200 finish. You can see the design and the cuts for the design that I went for on this, and I always just like to take a little look over and make sure everything's good. And we're ready to go to the crown. Now when I'm cutting the crown, I'm back to my 80 grit because there's a lot of material to remove. And once I've removed the first row of facets on the crown with the 80 grit, I'm going to transfer over to my 320. So getting a bulk of the material removed there, and we're just trying to form in the adequate thickness of a girdle where I want it to be on this 80 grit before transferring over. Now here's a shot of the finish after the 360 grit, and we have a couple rows cut in there. Now you can see majority of the design, and the only thing missing would be the table, which is the top cut. Okay, so now I'm moving over to my polish here, and I'm going to be polishing on my copper lap with a 50,000 grit, and that's going to be a really good finish for this. So the agate is not super transparent, so there's not going to be a lot of light return from the actual light shining inside the stone and coming through the stone, but there's going to be a nice little dance of color, as you can see, just from the actual polished faces. And I think it's pretty cool to have this kind of opaque stone. And I'm going to be transferring over to the table adapter now, which is going to be used to cut the last facet on the stone. And that's the table adapter there. This is the polish happening. And once I'm done this, I'm going to set the gemstone, and we're going to have a completed pendant.